There is a particular sound that precedes almost every major turn in this war, and it is not the sound of an explosion. It is the sound of silence right before Central Command posts a single line on social media that changes everything. That is exactly what happened this week, and if you were not watching the right feed at the right moment, you might have completely missed just how much of Iran's coastline the United States just quietly erased from the map of things Tehran can use to fight back. For months, Iran's entire strategy along the Strait of Hormuz has depended on a scattered network of hidden coastal positions, tucked into cliffs, islands, and inlets, built specifically to survive a war exactly like this one. And in the span of a single overnight operation, American fighter jets, drones, and warships went after that hidden network directly, hitting targets the Pentagon had apparently been tracking for weeks, maybe longer. If you were expecting this war to stay locked in its usual rhythm of missile exchanges and diplomatic threats, what happened along Iran's coast this week is not that. It is something considerably more calculated and considerably more revealing about what the United States actually knows about Iran's hidden capabilities. But before we get into exactly what was hit and why it matters so much, you need to understand the specific problem this operation was designed to solve, because this was not a random show of force. This was a targeted answer to a threat that has been quietly undermining the entire Western strategy in the Gulf for months. Ever since the current phase of this war accelerated, Iran has leaned hard on asymmetric tactics along its own coastline: small, fast attack boats, mobile coastal defense batteries, and hidden missile and drone launch sites positioned specifically to threaten commercial shipping without exposing Iran's conventional military to direct confrontation. These are not glamorous targets. You will not see them on a traditional map of Iranian military power. But they are exactly the kind of dispersed, hard-to-detect positions that have allowed Iran to keep threatening the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important choke points for global oil, even while absorbing blow after blow to its more visible military infrastructure elsewhere in the country. So when Central Command announced it had completed a 90-minute wave of strikes specifically against coastal defense systems and cruise missile storage and launch sites, including positions on Greater Tunb Island, that is not a routine bombing update. That is the United States saying out loud that it went after the exact hidden machinery Iran has been counting on to keep the Strait dangerous, and it did not stop there. In the hours before that announcement, American fighter aircraft, drones, and naval vessels had already carried out a broader overnight campaign, hitting what officials described as dozens of military targets scattered across Iran's coastal areas near the Strait itself. Sit with the scale of that for a second, because this is not one airstrike on one facility that gets a headline for a day and fades. This is a coordinated multi-phase operation deliberately built to dismantle an entire category of Iranian capability in one continuous push, hitting hidden launch sites, surveillance positions, and storage facilities before Iran had any real chance to disperse or relocate whatever survived the first wave. Now here is where this story becomes genuinely fascinating, because these coastal strikes did not happen in isolation. They landed at the exact same moment Washington reimposed its naval blockade on ships moving in and out of Iranian ports, a measure specifically designed to choke off the economic lifeline these coastal hideouts existed to protect. Think about what that combination actually means when you put it together. It is not just that the United States bombed a set of hidden military positions along Iran's coast. It is that Washington simultaneously moved to strangle the exact maritime trade route those positions were built to defend, applying military and economic pressure to the same stretch of coastline at the same time, as if the entire operation had been planned as one single coordinated squeeze, rather than two separate decisions that happened to land close together. If this breakdown is helping you see just how deliberately layered this operation actually was, hit that subscribe button right now, because there is a detail coming up about exactly how many ships the United States has parked in that region right now, and it is a bigger number than you are probably expecting. Now let's talk about the scale of what is actually sitting in those waters, because the coastal strikes were only half of this story, and honestly it might be the less surprising half once you see what is backing it up. According to reporting on the operation, the United States currently has roughly 21 naval vessels deployed in the region, an enormous concentration of firepower for a single theater, even by the standards of a war that has already dragged on for months. That is not a task force sent to make a symbolic point. That is a fleet capable of sustaining exactly the kind of blockade Washington just reimposed, intercepting vessels connected to Iranian ports while, in a genuinely striking twist, simultaneously working to protect an alternate shipping corridor that Oman has opened as an alternative route through the Strait. Read that combination again, because it tells you something important about how calculated this entire posture actually is. The United States is not simply trying to shut down all traffic through one of the world's most important oil choke points. It is trying to choke off Iran specifically while keeping an alternative lane open for everyone else, essentially rerouting global energy trade around Tehran rather than freezing the Strait entirely. And Iran's own state media has not been quiet about this one the way we saw with earlier pauses in this war. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has publicly vowed retaliation, describing the strikes as an act of aggression it intends to answer directly. That is a meaningfully different posture than the conspicuous silence Tehran chose during last month's diplomatic pause. This time, Iran is not staying quiet and letting ambiguity do the talking. It is making a public promise to hit back, the kind of statement that puts its own credibility on the line if it fails to follow through, and the kind of statement that tends to precede exactly the retaliatory strikes we have already seen this war produce again and again over the past several months. Now think carefully about what retaliation has actually looked like every other time Iran has made that promise in this conflict, because the pattern by now is not subtle. In previous rounds of escalation, Iranian retaliation has meant missile and drone strikes against American installations scattered across the wider region, in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan, hitting the network of bases the United States depends on to project power anywhere near the Gulf. Regional officials in some of those countries have confirmed their own air defense systems intercepting incoming projectiles during earlier waves, which tells you Iran has both the intent and, at least some of the time, the actual capability to strike well beyond its own coastline whenever it decides the moment calls for it. If the coastal strikes this week genuinely degraded the launch sites Iran would normally rely on for exactly that kind of response, the coming days become an open question with real stakes attached. Does Iran still have enough dispersed capability left to make good on the IRGC's public promise, or did this operation specifically target the machinery Tehran would need to follow through, leaving Iran to choose between a retaliation it cannot fully execute and a threat it never intended to walk back? Let's zoom out now, because there are three separate dimensions running underneath this operation, and understanding all three is the only way to see why this moment matters more than a single night of airstrikes usually would. The first dimension is capability. Coastal defense systems, cruise missile storage sites, and surveillance positions along the coast are not just weapons, they are the eyes and the reach that let Iran threaten shipping traffic without committing its main military assets to open confrontation. Damage that specific network, and you do not just remove a handful of missile launches, you remove Iran's ability to see what is coming and respond quickly, which is precisely the advantage asymmetric coastal warfare depends on in the first place. If Tehran genuinely lost meaningful surveillance and response capability along that stretch of coastline, the entire logic of using the Strait as leverage becomes considerably harder to sustain, regardless of how loudly Iran continues to threaten retaliation in public. The second dimension is economic, and this is the one with consequences that extend far beyond the Gulf itself. A blockade paired with an alternate shipping corridor is a genuinely unusual strategic choice, because it does not just apply pressure, it tries to prove the pressure is precise. Washington is essentially betting it can demonstrate in real time that it is possible to squeeze Iran's maritime economy specifically without freezing global oil flows entirely, a distinction that matters enormously to energy markets watching every single development out of this region for signs of a broader supply shock. If that distinction holds and the alternate corridor keeps functioning smoothly, it strengthens Washington's argument that this pressure is targeted and sustainable. If it does not hold, if the blockade ends up disrupting shipping more broadly than intended, oil markets could react far more violently than they have so far in this entire war. The third dimension is regional, and it is the one that will likely define what happens over the next several days more than anything else. Every country hosting American forces near the Gulf has already been drawn into the consequences of this war once Iran starts retaliating, whether or not those countries had any direct role in the coastal strikes themselves. If the IRGC follows through on its public promise the way it has in previous rounds, air defense systems across Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan will once again be tested in real time, and the population living near those bases will once again be the ones absorbing the immediate risk of a decision made entirely in Washington and Tehran. Now for the honest strategic read, because this operation does not resolve cleanly into either a decisive knockout blow or a symbolic gesture, no matter how tempting either framing might be. What actually happened is a deliberately layered strike, aimed specifically at the hidden coastal machinery that has let Iran punch above its weight in this war for months, timed to land at the exact same moment as a renewed blockade designed to strangle the economic route that machinery was built to protect. That is not an impulsive move. That is the kind of operation that gets planned over weeks, waiting for the right intelligence window to hit as much of the network as possible in one continuous push before Iran can disperse what remains. Whether it succeeded in permanently degrading Iran's coastal capability, or whether Tehran still has enough dispersed capacity left to make good on the IRGC's public promise of retaliation, is genuinely the open question hanging over the next several days. It's worth pausing here to think about who actually lives inside that open question, because it is easy to treat a phrase like coastal defense systems as something abstract, confined to military briefings and cable news graphics, when real consequences follow no matter which way this breaks. Merchant crews are the ones actually navigating waters where 21 American naval vessels are now enforcing a blockade, regardless of which flag their cargo sails under or which corridor they are told to use. Families living near American bases in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan are the ones who have already lived through Iranian retaliation once, and are now watching to see whether the IRGC's latest promise turns into another night of interceptions overhead. And Iranian coastal communities near the sites that were actually hit are the ones absorbing the immediate aftermath of an operation most of the world will only ever see described in a single sentence from a central command press release. So let's bring this back to where we started tonight, to that quiet overnight operation that reshaped part of Iran's coastline before most of the world had even woken up to hear about it. Strikes like this do not happen because a war has reached some natural conclusion. They happen because one side believes it has found a way to change the underlying math of the conflict, even when the rest of us watching from a distance cannot see the full intelligence picture that led to this specific timing, these specific targets, and this specific moment. Washington appears to be betting that hitting Iran's hidden coastal network hard enough, combined with a blockade precise enough to spare global oil markets the worst of the disruption, can finally break Tehran's ability to keep threatening the Strait indefinitely. Iran, through the IRGC's public vow of retaliation, appears to be betting something very different, that its capacity to hit back has not actually been broken, and that silence right now would look far more like weakness than a pause ever did. So here's the question I genuinely want to leave you with tonight, the one that matters more than any single line from a central command statement. If Iran's coastal network really has been as badly degraded as this operation suggests, does the IRGC's promise of retaliation end up being a threat it simply cannot fully deliver on? Or does Tehran still have enough hidden capability scattered elsewhere along that coastline to prove Washington's calculation wrong within the next few days? Drop your honest prediction in the comments and tell me which way you think this actually breaks. And if this breakdown helped you understand just how deliberately layered this operation really was, hit that subscribe button right now, because whichever direction this goes next, I will be right here breaking down exactly what it means the moment it happens.